Welcome to Vegas Programmers, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you to the sponsors. We've got Vegas Theater Company. We love them because every time we come here, it's a completely different stage. One time we came out here and we were on the surface of Mars, so that was interesting. But it's a good setup today. I like it. Nice and cozy. So today we've got an awesome talk lined up for you folks. We have a talk on Vue.js given by Gabriel here, who's going to be talking about it. He offered a couple months ago, and he was like, hey, we should do like a front end thing. And so I was like, yeah, I've used React and Vue a little bit. I'm more on the back end side, but want to hear more about Vue and where it's kind of come since, I don't know, probably a year ago. I mean, it's been around for quite a while, right? So yeah. So very interested to hear about where things have come with Vue. And just a couple of more announcements here. This is Vegas Programmers here is going to be at the corporate co-working space for our next meetup, for quite a few more meetups, just because my Saturdays are getting booked here. I'm coaching my son's Little League team, no big deal, we might win the championship. But unfortunately my Saturdays are booked, we have games and stuff like that. So I have to switch the venue and the date and time. So please stay tuned on meetup.com. If you're not on there, go to meetup.com, look at Vegas Programmers, sign up as a member, and that way you'll get the exact date. And yeah, we're gonna have a talk next month by Amin. There's a various amount of talks you can give. What did we end up choosing? Do you remember?
Linux Deep Dives?
Linux Deep Dive, yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I know Cody will like that one. He'll be the one person in the audience going, why aren't you doing it this way? No. So anyway, that's kind of the big announcement. We will be back at Tech Alley eventually until my schedule clears up maybe, so we'll see. But we've got a JetBrains license to give away here at the end as well. They also sponsor us, so if you're looking for a sweet IDE to use, whether it's C#, C++, Python, they have a great suite. And we have a 1-year free license, a few of them actually. So just grab me at the end and give me your email and I'll hook you up. So without further ado, Gabe, it sounds like you're ready to start. So
I'm just, yeah, let's go.
Okay, sweet. Let's kick it off. Everybody, round of applause for Gabriel. Yeah.
Thank you. As the guy who got the other JetBrains license, I can just flex it for you here right now. So I know we talk a lot about backend stuff here, or a lot of terminal stuff I've seen. It's just really complex. So I thought to come up with a front-end presentation just so we can see that it's actually not very scary at all. So it's going to be on Vue.js, which is a framework that I used to do React too, and to me, Vue was just kind of like one of those other frameworks. But after working with it for most of this year, actually, I found out I actually kind of like it the best of what I used so far. So moving into it, this is me. If you can tell when I took this picture, bonus points. So I'm a software developer. I design, build custom apps for small businesses. I usually use Vue generally, and then I use WordPress for the back end. And then I have the whole front end display as a shortcode, if you know what that is. I'm working for Big TB with Josh Stacy, if you know who that is. And that's where I do most of the custom solutions. I correspond with the clients myself. And I try to fish out some here at Tech Alley too. So just to start, for the people that might not be familiar with the front-end frameworks, or the people that don't program at all, and then for the people that do program, it's just another JavaScript web framework. You've seen one, you've seen a trillion. It's, one of many. So for people who are pretty new to that vocabulary, it's a tool to organize JavaScript to allow you to do more with less code. It allows you to do pretty complex things pretty simply, repeat less code by having repeatable components. We're going to find out what those are in just a second, and just have a better development process in general. So there's a bunch of these JavaScript frameworks, and I've included some here that weren't JavaScript just to show off how many there were. So these are all JavaScript. These not necessarily. This one's in PHP. So pretty common. What Vue brings to the table that pretty much every other one does as well is it uses reusable components, of course, just like every other one, which allows you to write a piece of code once and then use it everywhere else in your app. Fantastic. It brings reactivity to the table, which allows you to declare a variable and then update it and keep using the updated value in your app. So say if you have a scoreboard in a video game and you score some points, it'll reflect that score automatically. There is declarative rendering, which means that you can just tell it what to display, and then it will display it for you without you having to do all the HTML yourself, which is fantastic. And it accomplishes this with a virtual DOM, just like React and just like Svelte. And so you can do a single page app for this also, which allows you to just send the whole app to the browser and then have it react to the user interactions from there. And this is great because that means you don't have to ping the server every single time you go to a new part of your app, which is fantastic because it makes the experience super, super smooth after the first page render. And then it has an ecosystem and community. So all of these frameworks have a Discord community or a Reddit page or a forum, and then there's other component libraries, extra code that is compatible with all these that can allow you to build even faster. So what it brings that is totally unique is the application programming interface, which is totally unique to Vue. It does things a little bit differently than React or Angular or Svelte. And then you don't have to do it all at once. So a lot of times you have to just start the project from scratch in your terminal with like npm start this or npm, or is it mpx, and then something, and then it'll just start creating the boilerplate for you. In this case, you can do that, absolutely, totally an option, but not necessarily. So if you have a freestanding app, you can totally start using Vue and only parts of it, which is fantastic. Or if you have a backend already, instead of starting with the whole CLI or starting from the terminal, you can actually add in an instance of Vue and start building from there. So that's fantastic. So the single file components are very much like React that has the component and the JavaScript logic already in there. However, these are special. These are special because they have styling. So everything that you need for one component is all in one file. And then there's directives, which are hard to explain, but I will show you. So this is the meat and potatoes of it. We're going to get really technical, so buckle up. So my favorite part about Vue, and the reason why I insist on using it so much, is really just because of how intuitive it is. So over here is a single file component for a little button clicker, and then over here is the exact same button clicker, just made with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the thing is, Vue does things pretty intuitively compared to what you would be doing in just vanilla code. So if you're used to doing things with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, it's really not big of a jump. So for your first JavaScript framework, it would be a pretty great choice, only because dipping your toe in is super easy, and you can get a lot done anyways. So if you rearrange it here, same exact file, you can see that the style section is reflected in the HTML header. The template section is just a body. And then the script, usually in HTML, is contained in a body as well. But here we have a separate script section that is pretty much the same thing. So very, very intuitive. So here, this is a little quirk about Vue that I think is a little odd. They have two APIs for defining the logic in your components. So you can either use the options API, in which you, is there a laser pointer here?
I got one.
No? I was thinking there was one on the mic or something. So in the options API, everything's exported as one object. And then properties of that object are what define the logic for your component. So in this case, it exports this whole thing. And then all the reactive state that you want to have up here, you can just define as properties of the data object. Oh, thanks. The middle one?
Get on this side. There you go.
Beautiful.
Sorry.
Oops. Well, that'll be okay.
There you go.
Wicked. Cool. So yeah, you define your reactive variables here, and then there's just properties that are returned by this data function, and then you can use that in the rest of your component. Easy. This is personally what I use, because overall, in one object, you can just see everything that's going on with your component, and you could also collapse it, which makes seeing all your computer properties similar to the data properties really, really easy, and you can just get it out of the way, lickety-split. It's fine. Now, what they're actually going towards in the future is this thing called the composition API. So this allows you to do exactly the same thing as in the options API. However, it doesn't require you to export a whole object that contains everything. Instead, you can do things a little bit more like React, in which you just freely define, or you define everything as just a variable, and then you set it equal to a reactive value. And if you want to declare a computed variable here, and then just for context, all that means is that it reacts to other dependencies, like other values. It's a read-only value. To declare that sort of value, and that's Vue specific, I don't expect anyone to know that vocabulary. To declare the type of value, you'd have to use the computed function. So you have this just like essentially a whole JavaScript file where you declare a bunch of stuff and then you return it at the end, very much like React. I personally, like I said, I prefer this. It's a lot easier to understand. And also, a lot of the syntax is a lot simpler. And then over here, some of the syntax can be a little bit more complex. Like with this watcher here, essentially all that is an event listener for a certain variable. Over here in the options API, you have the ability to just make that a property. Super easy. But then here, over the composition API, it's a little bit more complex because you do have to specify the arguments for that function. Now, since they do want to go in this direction, in my opinion, unfortunately, that means that they've actually started to develop features that are exclusively available in the composition API. So particularly here, with things like event listeners, you have more options in the composition API. For example, I believe you can only do initial, like watchers that only react once in the composition API, as well as some other features. So unfortunately, this is getting phased out, so I'm going to have to switch pretty soon.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Isn't that the frustrating thing about these JavaScript frameworks is like they always make these very opinionated choices. Like it's just strange they don't have like backwards compatibility, right? Yeah, actually, one of my frustrations was that there was a lack of opinionation. I thought it was frustrating that I don't know how they work internally, but if they have two different APIs, that means that they have to support both with every single update. So I thought maybe that effort would be better spent with integrating some new features. Actually, pretty much that's it. Or fixing some other bugs. So I'm actually glad it's becoming more opinionated. However, I wish I were in a different direction. What's going on?
So React is actually a library, not a framework. It sounds like this is more of a library as well. Angular is a framework, which means that it gives you structure in your project and all that kind of thing. With React, you still need a framework to use with it, typically.
Is it because Angular can support some backend logic as well?
No, Angular is a full framework where you can create a project. You don't need anything else to use it. React is more of just a library. It doesn't tell you how you should structure your project or your code or anything like that, or your project. It's really just a library of APIs. And it sounds like this is also just a library of APIs, which is good. I mean,
yeah.
That's a lot of people like the library of APIs. I'm personally an Angular guy, so.
Yeah, I'm not super technical with the vocabulary, so it's good for you to point that out. And I can look into the differences.
So,
but I'm used to just comparing them, since a lot of people use them for the exact same use cases.
it's not, the advantage of being a library is that it's easier to plug into your existing project, right? Angular kind of takes over the whole thing.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the big advantages here, just because you don't have to do that. Because once you started a project, and so let's say you change your mind or you crack open an existing code base, you don't have to rewrite everything just to start using it.
Right.
So that is a cool advantage. I haven't used Angular though. It'd be cool to check it out. So, if you've ever used React, what's very common is to use if statements in the form of ternary operators, or to otherwise inject, using JSX, some JavaScript into what would be the HTML that's being output. And that's what allows you to make really dynamic user interfaces that react as well. In Vue, we have something called directives, which are plugged right into HTML. So if we go back here, I don't have any written here, but maybe here? I'll show something soon. Well, these allow you to basically make your HTML code that you're putting out reactive. It's not HTML, it's going to be written as HTML in the future, but this allows you to put some of this logic and not have to write a function or dedicate space in your script tag to make that happen. So the one that's most commonly used are these three right here. So if you want to make an element conditionally appear, that's really easy with vif, and then you can set it equal to the condition, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then vmodel allows for two-way data binding. So you can have a reactive variable reflected in your interface with not even a function to describe it, which I think is a big advantage over what my experience with React was earlier. So I compared them here with most of the libraries that people have been using, except for Angular. And I want to go over some of the differences and why I really like using Vue. So React to me is a little weird because with the functional components, it's like writing something that's going to appear on your page more or less statically as something, as an action. So it feels to me like using the wrong tool for the job, whereas Vue just has this intuitive layout that mimics HTML and CSS anyways. So I think React went a little bit too far when it came to like changing the syntax, even though it's fantastic and I've used it myself. And then when it comes to some of the methods like useEffect, if you're familiar with that, or useRef or useState, there's a lot to be accomplished there. However, I find that with useEffect and useState, there's a lot of working around those methods to accomplish what you want, instead of just, say, defining a data property that's going to be reactive anyways, and then you could define 8 of these without using another method. Or in the case of useEffect, using a watcher function, which is what I have here. A watcher function, which you can just tell what to watch out for and what to execute, instead of a useEffect, and then trying to identify the changes in useEffect, or setting the dependencies at the end all at once and having one big function run. So to me, it kind of feels like I said, using the wrong tool for a job. It gives me this sort of impression, just because we're using these to roundabout accomplish what these directly accomplish. And so when you compare it to Svelte, has anyone used Svelte here? No? 2 people? Okay, I'll make this quick. So Svelte is super simple. I actually really love Svelte. Svelte is special. It's a good place in my heart. It's amazing only because it's so simple. Like, it seems to be like about 25% shorter here than the Vue logic that I wrote out. And it's only because there's so much that they packed into these little characters, and they really strive to reduce the amount of code that you need to write. So you can put this out super, super quickly. The only advantage that I think Vue has here is the learning curve. So when I was first working on open source projects to learn Vue in the first place, it was easy for me to catch up, mostly because I can just read what the components involved and then figure out what that logic did from there. Whereas in Svelte, there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes. So here, these characters, are used to declare reactive variables. And in this case, this is a function that runs dependent on when the variables it's dependent on update, which is really, really handy. It's just hard to figure out sometimes. But yeah, Svelte, beautiful. Vue is just a little bit more beginner friendly. So Angular, I'm totally new to Angular, like I mentioned earlier, and I don't necessarily know what's going on, but this component is split across 3 files. It's got the HTML in one place, the CSS in another, and in this case, TypeScript in another one. And while I know that you can stack these by using the decorator to define multiple components in the same file, it doesn't quite make sense to me to split it across 3 files, which is why in this case, while Angular can be more powerful to contain your entire app, Vue can be a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more beginner friendly, and a little bit more easy to pick up and integrate into your existing products. So overall, that's what I think about all of these. And where I think Vue really shines, again, is in the simplicity, the intuitiveness, and how easy it is to pick up. It's a pretty shallow learning curve. So overall, there's a lot of things that make it easier to use any framework or any library because people have written a lot of code for it and they feel no need for you to write it again. There's a lot to pick from when it comes to Vue. However, the one shortcoming that I see is that the ecosystem in the community is not as expansive as it could be in order to make it really as easy as it could be. Whereas, for example, React, which I think has the biggest ecosystem, from what I've seen, has full libraries for you to make full apps, multiples of those, which have the styling baked in already in the case that you want to pursue a certain style. And while Vue has that, it just has a pretty slim selection. So when it comes to the community as well, I did some digging around. I cracked open some of these libraries. I dove into some communities. I asked some questions. And while it's there in the first place, there's not too much going on, and I've only found really a few people that are responding to messages, which kind of puts them in a customer support role, and I really thank them for it because they've helped me a lot, quite a bit. But there's not enough. There's not enough. So that's the only shortcoming, I think. Main one, at least. So I picked up 3 frameworks, I dove into them, I did some work in them, and from these 3, which are the biggest, I found Vue to really take the cake. It is amazing. So in case that you see this presentation, you want to try Vue for the first time or anything, I'd suggest going there. I tried Quasar, which is fantastic. It has an incredible amount of components. But the thing is that very similar to Angular and very similar to the concept of a framework, they really want you to start your project from scratch with them. They have a great CLI, and the Quasar framework, let's call it, can be used for anything from web apps to desktop apps as well. So very versatile, and it's very customizable because the path to changing the components within Quasar is much easier than it is in the rest of these 2. The only thing is, well, one, I think the fact that it's not progressive kind of goes against the whole point of what Vue stands for, because what it really is it labels itself as the progressive framework. So if you choose to use that for that advantage, this kind of goes against it. But the only thing is, it's just a little ugly, that's all. Nothing against it. It's not stinky. It works very, very well, but it is a little ugly. Vuetify is also pretty good. It's got Spunk. I really do like it. It can do anything that Quasar and PrimeVue can do as well. The thing is, the community is not very active, but that goes for all of them. It is a big package, which shouldn't really stop you. And it dedicates itself to material design, which is a great design system. And of course, many apps use it. It just might not be what your app needs. PrimeVue, the reason why I do like it so much is because it is progressive. You can integrate one component at a time, which is a very, very small package, or you can integrate all 80. And they're all very, very capable. It's not just for looks. The data table component can actually do all the sorting and filtering for you as well. And the thing that really makes it, besides the progressive aspect, the thing that really makes it shine is the fact that it's style agnostic. So Vuetify here has the styling baked in, material design. So since it is style agnostic, you can use the material UI design like with Vuetify. You can also use Bootstrap. You can also use Tailwind. You can also use any CSS framework you want. And there's even an option to take this framework and use it completely unstyled, which means you can use the package with zero CSS in it whatsoever. And that's fantastic because you can just use your own CSS in that case. So there's nothing to work around. They're as easy to work with as you want to work with them. You know, if you want to do all the styling yourself, they're there for you. Quasar and Vuetify, they don't really have that option. So for me, Prime Vue takes the cake for that. And the community, I've used it extensively. Unfortunately, it isn't very well built out, but they are there to help you. So that's really what I got. This is my LinkedIn here in case you want to ask more questions about Vue. And again, to recap, the reasons I think this framework is great to use is because it's so easy to learn, it's progressive, and it's awesome. Any questions? Go for it.
Technically in Angular, you can use inline styling if you want, just like Vue or anything else. Right? So you don't have to use CSS files. You do need 2 files.
Well, yeah, true. Inline is just a little tedious.
Yeah, but that's kind of the point. That's why you put it in the
Yeah, there's other tools for the job, but yeah, inline
Anyway,
works.
I was wondering, so have you tried Vue.js with like large projects? Because we had this problem with like, there was this problem with AngularJS originally and other JavaScript libraries that they work very well on cases that the library offers considered, but then when you step outside that boundary, you sometimes find things that are almost impossible to solve. And it tends to happen in large projects where you've got a lot of pages talking to each other and a lot of I was curious if you've seen any issues with Vue along those lines, or whether it's maybe you haven't tried to work out like that.
I've found some. So the first project that I started working on with this was a modification of an open source project, which is a big project manager that did tasks, projects, calendars, and all these things. And that was actually running with Vue 2, which is pretty surprising and outdated. But it carried it just fine. And what really helps it are the add-ons like Vuex, which is the state manager, and Vue Router, which is of course, the router. So those aren't included with vanilla Vue at all, but when you add those in, it can let you do just about anything. Is there a particular use case you're wondering about?
No, I was just curious. Just
Okay.
kind of in general. Because that's kind of the limitation of any JavaScript library.
Yeah.
Is that you give up some control because the framework does some of the stuff for you. And if it does it right, that's great. And trying to do like reactive events by yourself and just pure JavaScript is lots of fun.
Yeah, it's a big hassle. But luckily, like those two, they do the trick and they do it really, really well.
I mean, like if you were just going to write pure vanilla JavaScript app with no library, no Vue, no anything, or no React, you would have complete control, but you'd have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's why they exist.
Yeah.
What was your question?
You mentioned on one of the slides that you want where you on the front end you use WordPress for the backend. How do you now work out?
It makes starting up really easy. So the question was, and
Yeah.
you can confirm it, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The question was, how does using WordPress as a backend work out for me? Yeah. So it makes a lot of things way easier because it has the user management built into it. And it has a lot of course, there's the plugins. And those aren't necessarily built into it, but they're really easy to add them to the app. And in the case that those plugins use classes in global namespaces, you can create a plugin that can just use that namespace and call functions from that class. So it's really easy to just add on to your app without any extra coding. So what I do with a lot of plugins is that I could work with an open source app that's already a plugin, which is fantastic. But what's even better is when you can download multiple plugins onto your instance and then use those functions without having to come up with them yourself. It's really about speed, honestly. Any other? What's up?
So you mentioned that the ecosystem isn't as good as you would like to see. I'm wondering, based on what you've seen, do you think that Vue is growing, like the community is growing, and so that ecosystem is going to expand, or do you think that it's kind of just in third place or whatever place it's in as far as all these frameworks go, and it's just pretty much going to stay there? Like, so do you think Vue is growing and it could be a good thing for the future, or?
I think so, and the reason is because it is really easy to work in, which makes it easy to start things up in. The real competitor to that, and the thing that makes my optimism dull a little bit, is Svelte, which is way easier to use if you know what you're doing already. So the learning curve is a little bit steeper, but once you're off the ground, it makes things just it makes the development experience way faster. The only thing that Vue has that can compete with the Svelte development experience is Vue Router, in my opinion, because the routing in Svelte is very intuitive, but it's a little clunky. And React, the only thing it has going for it is the fact that it has all these libraries already, which I think is easy to overcome with the fact that you can just start up custom code way faster in Vue. So it stands a chance if people don't really pick up Svelte. And I mean, it's really up to debate in that case. But the only reason it would come out on top is because the adoption of Svelte is so low right now. And the only reason Svelte would fall behind is because Vue already has an existing ecosystem, even if it pales in comparison to React's.
So you think Vue is much more comparable to Svelte than it is to React?
I think so. The syntax, the file structure just aligns almost exactly. Svelte just has natively a lot. It just has a different API when it comes to the JavaScript syntax, and that's really the main difference. Besides that, there's some other things that set it apart, like the routing, which is baked into it, and then Svelte. If you decide to start your projects in Svelte, it also accounts for the backend, which is a Node/Express.
Yeah.
So as far as starting a project, that is a little bit easier. Whereas with Vue, you would have to either use a framework which includes it as the front end, which exists, or add it to an existing backend.
So Svelte is kind of like Next.js in the fact that it's like a full stack framework.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But you don't have to add anything on top of it. And there is a way to use, not Next with Vue, but it's very similar. I decided not to cover it. I thought that would be too advanced.
Yeah,
Next. Yeah, that's exactly right. Just a one-letter difference. Anyone else? Go for it.
So I have a question about like state management, because I think that that's always something with like React. You have to like add another package to manage state, right? And I guess what I mean by that is like, let's say you have a variable that needs to be used by multiple components. In Vue, how is that handled? Is there already global state management by default, or do you need like another library to do that? Because from my understanding, Vue and React, they both use shadow DOM, right? So each component is isolated. They can't really talk to each other. Like jQuery has access to the whole page, the whole DOM, right? Mm-hmm. So anything on the page it can interact with. But Vue, like a component, can't can't change another component unless you build that pipeline between them, right? So I'm just wondering, like state management, is that painful, or is there like stuff out of the box that handles that with Vue?
Does not stuff out of the box. It does require another library. The library is pretty well built out. It's called Vuex. At least that is the standard, so to speak. And it does make it really easy. It's not really a pain in the ass or anything. All you have to do is declare a store file, which has all of your state variables, or I guess your stored variables. And then from there, what I generally do is let's go back a little bit. Okay, so what I generally do is I keep them here in the computer property. And what that does is that you can set the state as a variable dependency. And then when the state updates, this variable will update. So frequently, whenever I need to do a call to the server or anything like that, I do that. And then I have the variable returned, or the server response returned to the state or to the store, either way. And then when it arrives, instead of having an async await, I just have it updated right here. So in a way, the state management, it's really easy to do, and it really simplifies doing server calls.
But so you have to put some logic here to capture that, though, right?
For the state?
Like, so if the state updates, they're in your components, it needs to be listening for that.
Yes, and the only way to do that is just to set it equal to one of the variables assigned here, or defined here. So here for over threshold, I'll just do the 2 parentheses, as it says right there, the bracket, and return the state variable.
Okay.
And that's as far as that goes.
I have one more question, which is, I'm actually, and this is a controversial statement, but I'm a huge fan of jQuery. Don't boo me.
Hot take.
So, WordPress comes with it out of the box. Do you still find yourself in the situation where you feel like you're using a sledgehammer for a nail sort of thing when you're adding Vue, when maybe you could get away with just adding a few jQuery components to solve like a particular problem, or are you always going to Vue now as like your Swiss Army knife?
Now I always go to Vue. And the reason being is because since I mostly do small business client work, we start with an MVP, and then we have to iterate upon that. And I've done it a couple times where I do just a vanilla JavaScript or a jQuery app just to start out with, and then as the requirements keep adding up, I just wish I started with Vue in the first place. And it's not really a big lift just to add an instance of this, because all it takes is a main.js file and an app.js file, or app.vue file. End of story. And then add a couple directories here and there, and it's not really that big.
And what's your development life cycle look like? Do you work locally and then like do a build and push it up, or are you just working on the server running? Because you still have to run a build after you make changes to Vue, right? It needs to transpile this to JavaScript and all that, right?
Yeah, usually I use Webpack to just roll it all up, and then I have that script loaded on the backend. So then that just shows on WordPress. It depends, Usually what I do is, in an ideal case, I would have WordPress running locally, and then I would have the files open on my computer, the same exact files that it's running on, and then whenever I update, I can pretty much do a hot reload, and it'll just work right then and there. Mm-hmm. So I can just do some edits, press build for Webpack, and then go on over to the WordPress, press reload, and the changes are there. However, most of the time, what I find myself doing is setting up a live sandbox. So it's on a server anyways. It's just not the production site. Mm-hmm. And I re-upload it as a plugin. And then what that does is that it tells me that the plugin is still installable and it won't break when I actually try to upload it. Because whenever I do develop locally, the last thing that I'm missing is the activation and the installation, which takes place in WordPress as part of the plugin installation. And if I don't do that for long enough, eventually I will find a way to break it on installation without me even knowing, because I haven't installed it for months.
So you're just building like a plugin and throwing all your custom Vue stuff into that plugin, and that's it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you don't have to mess around with any of your WordPress templates or child templates or anything like that.
No. All this does is, for the people who don't know what a shortcode is, it's just a little string that you can put on a WordPress page, and when it's found and you have a shortcode hook defined in WordPress, it will display whatever you want to be there. So in that case, what I do is I just define my shortcode hook, and then I have it inject a little div with a particular ID. And then here, when I declare an instance of Vue, I have it hook onto that div with that ID. And then I just build up the rest of the app right there. So I just have that built into my Views folder in my overall app. So it's like 2 halves of the app.
Very cool. Do we have any other questions?
One
Go
more.
for it. On your question, so does Vue and jQuery work together? Can you do it? Have you tried them together?
You can. I prefer not to.
Because Angular and jQuery do not mix at all.
Yeah.
So if you start an app with jQuery and then you want to switch to Angular, for example, you're going to throw away your jQuery because you're good. But you were getting at state management was also the same thing I was kind of saying in the question, but not as eloquently. state management is really where it gets tricky, to say the least, right? Because, like he was saying, like Joshua was saying, the communication between components is tricky in every framework, right? And usually, when you run into those cases that you can't solve, it's exactly that, state management, some kind of communication issue going on, right?
Oh, that's what you meant with complex apps.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. So.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of other ways to handle state management, but at the end, just using the management library is the best way to go.
Right.
Because then it's just simpler. Like you can provide context and you can do prop drilling, but that's
what Angular versus AngularJS solved the state management issue. Right?
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Was it with any of those, like context or?
It was apparently there. I wasn't a big AngularJS guy, but apparently there was some component communication problems that were just not possible to solve. And there's performance issues too, obviously, right? If you have 50 variables and every time you do a refresh cycle, you update all 50 variables, you could start to get some performance issues.
Yeah, I see that.
So a lot of the improvements, I haven't done a huge amount of React, but I think React does a pretty good job of that too, of maintaining state properly in a lot of different complex cases, just like Angular does, without having a heavy duty, right? Without having a performance hit. And actually, the later version of Angular, that's one of the things they've been working on, is making performance a little better, because Angular is a pretty heavy library, so performance wasn't something.
Yeah.
But that's a very good point.
UX helps a lot.
Any other questions? One more? Yeah.
How do you have the WordPress backend talk to Vue.js? Do you use like GraphQL or?
How do I help the backend talk to Vue.js?
Yeah.
So what you can do is when you call the script to, like when I call the bundled script so that Vue can be included in WordPress, you have the option to do what's called localizing. And what that does is it provides a context for the app to be loaded, or in general terms, for the script to be loaded. So what I do when I localize the script is I can provide any variable that I want Vue to have access to. So that's not live, but I can provide things like the database ID, because WordPress and MySQL, they have a particular unique ID that the database uses. I don't do that, but in the case that I do need to pass some sort of information from the backend to the front end, I do that. And then for any data that can change or is reactive, I just do a call to the server again, and I set up an endpoint that will then reach out to the database or query the database and return that info. So I have queries running back and forth, HTTP queries. Requests, my bad. Josh?
How do you like working with WordPress? I hear it sucks.
WordPress works. That's it. Thank you.
Good job, Dave.
Thank you. Awesome. Cool. So we have a couple more minutes here. I want to do a quick lightning talk real quick on the AI thing here. No, I'm good. Just clip off the... right there. So I'm going to give a longer talk about this next month, along with Amin's talk. But I wanted to just quickly kind of show you guys something I've been working on, because that's what this meetup's all about, right? Who knows if it'll work? I don't know. But let me see if I can get it up here. Okay. So I got really intrigued by. First off, thank you, Gabriel. That was an awesome talk. Now I need to go use Vue. I tried to learn React, but I got a headache halfway through. So I should try Vue. It looks a little easier. So I got inspired from a talk that Cody, our co-organizer here, gave about Ollama, and I wanted to experiment with it a little bit. So I wanted to show what what I did through a tutorial real quick, just to kind of eat up about 15 minutes here. So just to back up a little bit and explain what Ollama is, let me show you the very rough slides I got here. So Ollama basically is like if you want to use ChatGPT on your computer. You don't want stuff going into the magic ether of the internet. You want the stuff running on your machine. So when Cody gave this talk, I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. I wonder if it's possible that you could use Ollama to help you develop code, like how Copilot works, how a lot of these plugins work nowadays with your IDE. So I experimented a little bit and I found this tutorial here, which was pretty interesting. It's on Ollama's website. They wrote it up earlier this year. Essentially, there's a plugin that's available for VS Code. It's also available for JetBrains, wink wink, I have free licenses. And you can install this Continue plugin that uses your Ollama installation locally. And it acts just like Copilot, except you're paying a whopping $0, which everybody likes free, right? So essentially how this works is you install Continue either on VS Code or JetBrains. There's probably also a few others if you're using Vim or something. I'm sure there's a way to do something similar. And then you install Ollama. Ollama kind of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Cody, but it seems like a glorified Docker container, like a Docker engine running locally, right? Is that safe to say?
It is containerized models, yes.
Okay. So once you get that installed, you see a little llama on your desktop, and that's cute. But he doesn't do much. There's no like GUI for Ollama. But if you open up your CLI, that's where things get a little interesting. So here you can use the Ollama CLI to run any open source LLM model, right? So for example, if you go to, and I also found out this from Cody, because you're awesome, Cody, something called Hugging Face. Very weird name. But anyway, it is basically a giant open source LLM dumpster fire. And it has every freaking thing you can think of. So for example, if I click models up here, you can use any of these open source models. So if you want to take an image and make a new image, if you want to create a video, if you want to do object detection in an image, if you want to turn an image into text or vice versa, text into an image, all of these are very specialized models that you can download locally, run in your own machine, and perform these actions. So very, very cool. There's one called CodeStral, which they talk about in this tutorial here. So you simply install Ollama, run CodeStral, install Continue on your IDE here, and you will then have this little Continue thing over here on the right. You can see I've got Copilot also running on here side by side with it. But you click on Continue, and then this little gear icon, and this is your JSON configuration here. You can have it use any of the models, so you're not stuck to just using CodeStral. If you want to use a different model, like I think Facebook's got one, you can just tell it, hey, use this model, right? So in this example, they give you this model here, and you can create custom commands for yourself. So for example, if I want to write tests, I can just highlight a function and do /test as a command, and it basically underneath the hood is using this prompt to tell GPT, or I shouldn't even say GPT, to tell your local Ollama AI that's running, saying, hey, go build me tests, right? So then it will actually write unit tests for you, which is awesome. So I'll give a quick demonstration here. So this is the tutorial that comes with it. It's pretty cool. It's a super quick one, but basically they just say, the way it works is if you are confused about what some code is doing, you can highlight it, and then you can then use Command J here. I'm sure the command's different depending on whatever, but then you can see it threw this into a prompt on the right-hand side here. And now we can just ask it a question like, what does this code do? This code do, and run it. Here's the con. I'm running this locally, so it takes a while, right? ChatGPT and all these other engines have nodes and nodes and nodes of data centers and compute power and, you know, whatever else Terminator stuff they're running. But this here, obviously you can see it's a little slower, but I'm paying $0 and I'm running it all locally. So if you're very privacy driven, if you're working with very proprietary code that you don't want to be sending up and down to the magic internet gods, this could be something you could take a look at that keeps it very containerized. Let's say you travel a lot, you don't have internet, whatever, you can still take advantage of AI and use this stuff locally. So it's pretty cool. You can see it gave me a little answer here. It said, hey, you know, it does this, and that's wonderful. Now, if you want it to actually edit code, you can do the same thing. You can highlight it, but instead of Command J, you use Command I, which basically says like, hey, edit my code here in my file, and instead of the prompt over here, now it's just asking you for a prompt over here. So I'll put make this code easier to read. I don't know what this is going to do, but we'll find out here in a second. Sorry, I'm typing with one hand. So I guess, I mean, that I will next month give like a little bit deeper dive into this because I'm going to experiment with a couple other things. For example, I'm currently playing around with a thing called Draw Things. So there's this app you can download. It works locally. It uses those Hugging Face models like I was talking about. And you can create images. So just like you do with ChatGPT, you say, hey, make me an image. You can do the same thing. You give it a prompt up here and have it make you an image. So I could say like, make a dragon. And we'll let this run. I'm not sure really how, this is probably going to take a while. So we'll put that away. But let's go back here and see what this did. And here's our new code. So we asked it, hey, make this easier to read. It basically is like, hey, let me just put more comments, it looks like, is what it tried to end up doing, which is fine. It did, you can see it's still churning through right now too. But it's being more verbose with the code. So instead of like I or whatever this list was originally called, you can see, and if we want to see what it was before, I think you can right click or go back. Yeah, so here you can say, hey, no, I don't want these changes, or yes, accept the changes. But yeah, pretty cool. I mean, I've been kind of like just trying everything, right? I've tried GPT, I've tried Gemini, which is now Google's AI product, and I think by far my favorites are Ollama and ChatGPT. Those seem to be the two solid ones. What I would like to experiment with more, and I need to play around with, is doing something called RAG, where you upload like documents or files to the AI to kind of build your own model. What's up?
You're already doing RAG.
I am doing RAG then. Well, so what we mean by that then is when I highlight that goes into the AI model, right?
It's the same principle. Completely different question. I'm assuming that this computation is taking place on the CPU of your machine and not a GPU.
Correct.
Rocco, that's a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. It might be using my GPU locally, right?
Is that an M chip?
Yes.
Then yes, it's using your GPU.
GPU? Okay. Maybe it depends on the architecture then.
Because I'm rocking a ThinkPad. I have a lot of RAM, but I don't have a GPU on.
It could. I think it still goes and uses your CPU if a GPU isn't available.
You can still use CPU.
Yeah.
It just might be a touch slower than what he's running. You can also get more performance out of it, depending on like adjusting. Like I think he's running a 22 billion parameter model, which means you have to have like 25 gigs of memory. So it's if you size it down and don't store all the memory of your machine, you can sometimes get better performance.
We got one more question over here.
So is there like a place, like in the JSON file, where I can customize if I'm using my GPU or CPU, or if I like build a GPU rig and I just want to send stuff to it, like test? Is there an easy or simple way?
Great question, actually. So there is on Ollama's website, there's actually instructions for you to run. If you want to use Ollama, but let's say you have like a slow machine or whatever, you can run this in your own AWS cloud, GPC, whatever, or bare metal server you have, right? So you can actually still use Ollama yourself and build your own ChatGPT. So where I've seen people use is there's a SaaS product called replicate.com, maybe? Yeah, I think. Yeah, replicate.com. So same thing, you can take one of those open source models and then you can use them to host it. And then they just charge you per call sort of thing. So it's like a Lambda-ish way of like using other people's hardware to run these open source models. So, yes?
On Hugging Face, so one of the complaints with ChatGPT is the alignment or steering or manipulation of the model. On Hugging Face, you're finding it's largely just, here's the code, it does whatever it does. If you ask it to do something, tell a dirty joke, it'll tell a dirty joke. I'll tell you shouldn't want to hear a dirty joke.
Yeah, you didn't hear it from me, but like a lot of these like risque kind of AI models, like some bad things that are doing things with images, are done in that capacity. You can't use ChatGPT for that stuff. If you ask it, it's like no, right? Yeah, yeah. It has morals, which is funny for AI. Yeah.
Just to kind of answer this question, it's on Hugging Face. There's models that have censorship, but you can also pick models that say that they're censorship removed.
Nice.
So you can still get like Llama 3, but with all the censorship stuff removed, if you really want.
Oh, I'm doing
So anyway, that well, I'll dive deeper into this next month. Just a couple of things. If you do want to do a talk, I know some of you have already done talks. We're still trying to line up stuff for December and January. Get in touch with me. If you don't have my contact information, I've got cards up here. I am a software developer myself, so if you need AWS or backend or complex development, hit me up. And yeah, thanks to everybody. Thanks to Vegas Theater Company for hosting us. You guys rock. Thanks, Ryan, for recording. You always get those up on time. And you do a good job on staying on top of me to get the details on all of this stuff. And yeah, thanks for everybody that came out. Without you guys, we wouldn't have a meetup. So thank you. Appreciate it. And remember to stay tuned. Next month, we are going to be at the corporate co-working space. If you are looking for a free day pass to work at a place, they're awesome. And we really appreciate them sponsoring the space for that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you want the JetBrains license, come grab me because I got to split soon. So thank you, everybody.